is that you're welcome here. Make yourself at home.
Welcome, and I'll start too. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Scott Matheson, and it's 6:30 a.m. here in Auckland, New Zealand, and we welcome everybody who's on this webinar, this Dutch webinar on how you can move to New Zealand. So thank you very much for joining us in your evening time. We've got a lot of information to give to you today, and I have three amazing, very, very experienced panelists with me today who I'm going to introduce to you now. First, all the way over in the UK, well, not so far from you, but a long way from me, is Paul Goddard. Paul.
Yeah, hi Scott, and hey everyone. Thanks for being here. This is awesome. Our first Dutch webinar, which is really exciting. Yeah, I'm over in the UK at the moment, and very, very busy talking to lots and lots of people from the UK and Europe and everywhere else who want to make the move. And so I'm just looking forward to sharing a lot of information. I moved to New Zealand back in 2003 with my family, lived there for 18 years. I'm in the UK currently. I will be hopping back to New Zealand at some point, but look forward to helping you all.
Thank you, Paul. And bringing all the way back down to New Zealand and into Auckland is our Head of Immigration Services for New Zealand, Zinny Chang. Zinny.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Yes, my name is Zinny. I am a licensed immigration advisor. I head a team of 16 licensed advisors. So we are one of the biggest teams in New Zealand, and I guess across the world as well. We have a very wonderful team with lots of experience. We were just looking at our results the other day and have a 99% success rate, so you are in good hands. Myself, I am a migrant as well. I moved to New Zealand with my family in 2002. So I grew up in New Zealand, went to university here, and now I'm working here. So it's a wonderful place, and I look forward to assisting you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Zinny. And our third and final panelist, who is Monique Powers, who helps with Zinny and the visa team. And Monique is special on this webinar because she was schooled in the Netherlands. So Monique.
Goedenavond allemaal en welkom naar onze eerste Nederlandse webinar. Dus mijn naam is Monique. Ik ben in Nieuw-Zeeland geboren met Nederlandse ouders. En ik heb ook 18 jaar in Nederland gewoond. Dus waarom een Nederlandse webinar? Er is op het moment ontzettend veel belangstelling vanuit Nederland om naar Nieuw-Zeeland te verhuizen. Maar ik ga nu weer in het Engels door. So switching back to English, we all know that the vast majority of the Dutch people do speak really good English. That's one of the reasons that makes them actually really good migrants. Not just that, they have a very high level of education, a very strong work ethic, and they've got a really good ability to fit in. In fact, the Dutch are known as the invisible migrants because they embrace the New Zealand way of life and consider themselves Kiwis. But if you do still want a slice of Holland and New Zealand, you can find that here as well. Even just very recently, we celebrated the Dutch King's birthday, Koningsdag. Last month, we lit up our iconic Sky Tower in Auckland City in the colour of orange to celebrate your festivals. And it was not just Auckland. All around New Zealand, there were festivities. There were Dutch film festivals. We had our bikes all and with flags. We dressed up in orange and cycled around the waterfront, etc. And we have our very own windmill in New Zealand in a little place called Foxton. It is now a cafe restaurant. And of course, you can guess the name of it. It's called De Molen, or the Windmill. At the moment, there are around 45,000 Dutch in New Zealand, the last census, and 100,000 from Dutch descent. My parents actually moved to New Zealand back in the 1950s. Those days, we had something called assisted migration. They arrived on 2 separate ships in the port of Wellington because they weren't married yet. They weren't allowed to travel together. The assisted migration scheme was a huge success, and I believe it was 6,000 people that moved to New Zealand from the Netherlands during the 1950s. And yeah, as I said, it has grown ever since. We've got a very strong relationship with the Netherlands. There's trade relationships. There's a lot of cultural exchanges. There's a lot of combined research and development from several universities happening right now. And so I consider myself lucky. I'm very grateful now to work for a company like Working In, where we genuinely love helping people make the move to New Zealand. A lot of people like yourselves have been dreaming about it for years, thinking about it for years, but don't know where to start. So you're at the right place right now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Monique. And it's a real privilege to have you on board, and your experience is, and Zinni's experience and Paul's experience. You know, you've all experienced fully the trials and tribulations of moving country, but also the bravery that goes with that, and the opportunities that, and the new doors that creates. It's a wonderful experience for those who are brave enough to put their foot over the pedestal. So welcome again to everybody. My name is Scott Matheson. I've been running Working In for over 20 years now. We have literally helped tens of thousands of people move to New Zealand. We have a small team, really, but also a large team. And what I mean by that is Monique talked about us being a caring team. We are small enough to care, but we're large enough to handle and manage, a very significant number of inquiries. That's not our full team there. We're about 60 staff here. The people that I just put up on the screen there are immigration advisors who are licensed under the code. Okay, so we're going to get into the detail now about how you can move from the Netherlands to New Zealand in this quite extraordinary time. New Zealand officially opens its borders in July. The immigration settings have changed considerably. There are a number of factors that need to be considered, but as is with anything, and this is what Paul will help us with, is a good plan is where it all starts. And our message to you today, which you will hear a lot, is start the journey with a plan, put your stake in the ground, complete a free assessment to see whether you're eligible, and then at least you're on the pathway. You're starting your journey. So to tell you what we're going to be covering off today, here's a quick summary, if you could bring that up. Thank you. Yeah, so there's a quick overview on where things are at with the borders and immigration. I'll cover that off. Paul will talk about where do you start, how you make the move, how can you make the move, and how do you make the move. And we'll try and answer some main questions. So I have neglected to tell you that one of our licensed immigration advisors, Petra, is on the chat. So please feel free to ask questions. We will ask, we will answer as many questions as we possibly can, but if we can't answer all the questions now, we will afterwards. So please feel free and ask as many questions on the chat as you choose. So before I go to our first speaker, I just really wanted to give you an update on what's happening here in New Zealand and why the situation is so positive for skilled migration, despite what you may read. Our borders have been closed for 2 years. We've had a very strict COVID policy. And at the beginning of COVID, a lot of people left. A lot of students left to go home. A lot of working holiday makers left to go home. And so that created critical skill shortages. What we're now finding as well is that our international students, which is a really big sector, those people have not yet come back, so they can't fulfill jobs. But also mainly for the last 2 years, New Zealand has been reliant on skilled migration and hasn't been able to bring anybody in. So because we are a recruitment and employment agency, we are getting literally calls from clients on most days saying, we need 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people immediately. So there's chronic shortages that have been pent up over this time. Why is that relevant? Because immigration is so tightly related to employment. In order to move to New Zealand, you do need a job. And at the moment, the job market is extremely tight and unemployment is at an all-time low. So I'm going to, before I introduce you to Paul, I just want to cover off something that's really, really important about advice, because both Paul and Zinni, who are on this webinar, are licensed immigration advisors. And if I can just hand it over to you, Zinni, what is a licensed immigration advisor, and particularly, why is it so important?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So New Zealand came out with a law where anyone that is providing immigration advice or assistance must be either licensed or exempt from licensing. So the exempt people are, for example, lawyers. The whole point of it is really to protect the consumers. So making sure that whoever you are getting advice from are competent. So for us to become licensed, we have to go through a course of study. So that's at least 1 year. And after our studies, we undergo supervision for 2 years by a full license holder. And only then can we apply for our own full license. So we have to renew our license every year, making sure that we meet the competency standards and meeting the code of conduct. So the code of conduct is what governs our everyday, day-to-day activities. For example, how we charge fees, having a written agreement, how we communicate with you, making sure we are only giving up-to-date advice that is relevant and tailored to yourself. So no matter where you go to seek advice, people always say, oh, my family member, my relative moved to New Zealand, I could seek advice from them. They might have a totally different experience from yourself. They might have different background. So we look at each and every one of our clients' own situation and tailor our advice based on, your goals, your intentions, your background, and also based on the policy at the time, because policies, as we know, constantly change. So seeking advice for a licensed immigration advisor will protect yourself and make sure that you are on the right path.
Yeah, fantastic, Zinni. And I think that's a really important consideration because, especially around that financial aspect, that if you are paying or handing money over to an advisor, the funds that you pay, as Zinni said, go into a trust fund and they're kept there safely until the work is actually done. And we unfortunately hear a lot of stories of people paying somebody and then the work not being done and then never seen again. So look, that's who we are. We're licensed immigration advisors. We have 16 on board, all monitored by the New Zealand government. And that's why we're one of the largest and most successful immigration consultancy and recruitment businesses in New Zealand. Paul, I really want to talk to you because one of the big issues that so many people have is the job and the visa. And there's a thing that we call the catch-22. And it's a challenge, right? Especially for people who are living in the Netherlands, and how on earth do they get a job in New Zealand? Wow.
It's the biggest, probably the biggest hurdle that everyone faces. And you kind of face this hurdle immediately. As soon as you look at moving to New Zealand, it becomes very apparent. With very little research, you'll realize that most of you need a job offer to move to New Zealand. You'll also then look online and see jobs advertised that will say something like, you need a visa to apply for this role, or you need the right to work in New Zealand to apply for this role. So immediately you think, hang on, I can't get a job offer because I haven't got a visa, but I can't get a visa because I haven't got a job offer. Where do I even start? That's the biggest hurdle. A lot of people don't know where to start. We're getting some great questions here at the moment in the chat room, pointing these things out. Lots and lots of skilled people, but not knowing what to do to make this happen because they can't apply for visas. And the catch-22, just so that people know, it exists because most employers do not know how visas work. They're just busy running their business. Why would they know how visas work? They're not required to understand how visas work. And so if you send a CV to an employer who has no idea of if, when, and how you're going to get to New Zealand, it doesn't matter how good your CV is until that employer sees proof that if they offer you a job, everything is going to run quickly and smoothly and your visa will be issued and everything will be okay and you'll get the right to work in New Zealand, then usually not going to respond to you. And most people's experience of trying to move to New Zealand is randomly firing off CVs to New Zealand employers, getting no response at all, or sorry, you're overseas, we can't help you, or hey, you look great, let me know when you get here. None of those things actually get you a visa. And so you've got to do it differently.
Look, it's terrible, really, and it's a little bit embarrassing that New Zealand employers can be, and not all. I mean, some employers are really outward looking, but they don't really understand that there's a global market of amazing people out there, and they ignore that opportunity until it is presented and explained to them. And as you were talking, Paul, someone's just said, it's very difficult to find a job in engineering. I applied but don't get any responses. Shall I first apply for a visa or continue with my applications for a job? And it's sad in a way that this is the situation, but it is the reality. Because you are offshore, then New Zealand employers are unlikely to look at you because basically it's, in their mind, too hard. So a big part of what we do is try and make you easy for them to communicate with. So Paul, maybe you just want to sort of talk about that a little bit more, because it's the biggest issue. You know? No,
absolutely. I mean, we call this employment support, helping people get job offers. Now, what we have to make very, very clear, and we make this very clear to everyone, you are the best people to be interacting with employers and recruiters, etc. So this isn't us going out and getting you a job and you sit back and do nothing and then suddenly a job appears. That's just not the real world. It would be nice, but it doesn't happen. It takes effort from you. It takes motivation. It takes dedication. It takes a positive attitude, but it also requires support to remove the risks and barriers that stop the employer engaging. So one of the simple solutions, there's multiple solutions that we provide. One of the simple things that will highlight this is, I mentioned that if you just send a CV to an employer, it's 99% likely to be rejected because the CV doesn't tell the employer everything they need to know. If you're working with us and you apply for a job with an employer, then that CV will tell the employer everything they need to know, because we give it what we call a letter of support. We give you a document. Once we've verified you, once we've checked you, once we've made sure you get visas and everything else, and we've formatted your CV for New Zealand, we can give you a letter of support that literally says to the employer that you are eligible for a visa because we've checked that out. You're fully prepared and document ready because we've done that with you as well. You're available on Zoom for a call. And if they offer you a job, a visa can be issued quickly and smoothly. That's the difference between using us and not using us in a very simplified way. We also show you how to tap into the hidden job market. We have our own employment support coordinators. We work with numerous employers throughout New Zealand. We've got recruitment agents that we work with. We've got our own recruitment teams. There's various ways of doing it. There isn't one box or one box fits everybody, everybody's different. But the idea of employment support is any interaction you're having with an employer, we also aim to be interacting with the employer to reassure the employer that everything's going to be okay. And not just reassure them, prove to them that everything's going to be okay. And that's a huge difference. And it's something that we quite uniquely do. I mean, I don't think there's anybody else in our industry, well, we know there's not, that does it the way that we do it. And we've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So there's a bit going on there. To give context, I think, Zinni, it would be quite helpful to describe our immigration process and visas. And what I will say, I'll ask you to explain, Zinni, and I'm going to tell everybody right now that on July 4 this year, New Zealand is changing its immigration system. It's the biggest change in 30 years. It's absolutely given it a massive upheaval for the benefit of the migrant, I will add. It's to reduce exploitation and make sure that if you are migrating, you can only get a job with an accredited employer who's been pre-vetted by the government to make sure that they have the funds and the policies in place to protect a migrant worker. So it's a good scheme, and it starts quite soon. So your timing, if you're thinking of moving to New Zealand, is actually quite good. A, the job market is hot, and B, there's a new scheme for the protection of migrants. Zinni, can you just run through what the accredited employer work visa is? And then secondly, most people will be wanting residency. So how does that work? It's a two-stage process.
Yeah, so absolutely. We are going through one of the biggest immigration reforms, I guess, ever in decades. So over the last 2 years, borders have been closed, but even prior to the borders being closed, immigration has already been planning this change. It's been pushed out because of COVID, because of border closure, but finally we are now in the midst of it. So the accredited employer work visa scheme is the scheme that will be replacing 6 existing work visa schemes. The focus really is making a shift towards the employer, whereas traditionally you could have maybe submitted an application on your own. The employer gives you some documents to go along with that application. But really moving forward, that's not going to be the case. So it's a 3-stage process. Firstly, the employer needs to apply for accreditation with Immigration New Zealand. So this accreditation actually opened just this Monday. So we are currently working with lots and lots of employers to assist them with gaining accreditation. So making sure they have a good, viable business, they have a history of compliance, and good processes to manage any HR or complaints or things like that to help you settle into the job. So really it is to, like Scott mentioned, protect you and ensure that you are going into a good work environment. So that is the first stage, accreditation by the employer. Second stage is a job check application also by the employer. So we are also assisting employers on the job check application. It's an application to Immigration New Zealand saying we have this vacancy that we have not been able to fill through our local advertising and local recruitment efforts. We are now looking at recruiting offshore or migrant workers to fill the role. So this is also quite a tricky application for the employer because there are very specific requirements of the labour market testing that needs to be done. So it's really important for employers to get this done right. So once the employer has a job check approved, then only we come to the third stage, which is the work visa application of the migrants, so of yourselves, the individuals. With this work visa application, you need to make sure that you meet mandatory health, mandatory character requirements, and also there is a suitability criteria. So what qualifications do you have? Do they meet the New Zealand standards? What type of work experience do you have? So before you even get to being able to submit that work visa application, the employers have to go through that 2 stages. And you have to make sure that you have, the credentials to meet the visa requirements. So some jobs require minimum 3 years, some jobs require minimum 5 years. So what we do, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about it later on, is an assessment. But it's really important to make sure it all lines up because during the job check application by the employer, they also need to know what skills you would have, because in the advertising that they do, they need to list it. So if they listed something that you do not have, then unfortunately that job check application might not be able to be used for supporting your visa application. So I think in essence, there's a lot of planning that needs to go into it. It's not just going in there, submitting an application and you get an outcome. It's, you know, making sure every step of the process is well planned, everything aligns. And yeah, so there's a little bit more that goes into it. Yeah.
Look, I appreciate that. There's a lot to explain here. And what I think Zinni is trying to say is that if, depending on your skills need to match up exactly with what the employer is looking for. And so sometimes on both sides, we need to massage that into place so that the same language, the qualifications, the work experience align. And that's quite a difficult process, but it's something that we do. So look, we won't go into that in any more detail, but what you did say is that there's, you know, that we need to assess your skills. Maybe I can just move over to Monique here and talk about that first stage of a free eligibility assessment in order to kind of start the process and check out whether you are eligible, because, you know, many people are, but a lot of people aren't. Monique, can I just hand this over to you?
Sure, Scott, thank you. So I talk to lots of people every day, and they always say to me, you know, the hardest part is actually starting. And so we will show you how to start this process. It is what we do is, it's actually my turn to listen to you, and it's really, really important for me to understand, for us to understand how, what, when, why do you want to move to New Zealand. So we do a full review of your ability to move to New Zealand. It's a very short assessment form that you fill out. It may take 15 to 20 minutes. And then we will check your, it's based on your background, on your health background, your working history and your education history. And not just you, but everyone that will be moving with you. Now, that report gets checked by a licensed immigration advisor. They do the report. It is not a computer-generated report. And then we will then also follow up when we send that report out to you. There'll be another link to book a Zoom meeting with a licensed immigration advisor. They go through the report in full detail with you. Make sure that you understand it. It's also your opportunity to ask questions. Maybe you want to ask questions about the way of life in New Zealand, the cost of living in New Zealand. Maybe you want to ask more about the education in New Zealand. So what I do on that 15-minute call is try to talk to you about all that, why it's important to do this assessment.
So yeah, so that's just to qualify that, the first stage is a free eligibility assessment. And then if our advisors believe that you meet the criteria, then you'll have a small 15 minutes with you, Monique, bit of a chat, probably because of your Dutch.
Sometimes it's a bit longer.
Yeah, I was going to say that maybe because it'd be a bit longer if you're talking to Dutch people, and that's fine. And then, but if you choose to after that, then there's a second, more in-depth assessment, a full assessment, which costs how much money?
299 New Zealand dollars.
Yeah, and I think that is the crux. And so for us as a business, everybody, what we're saying is at that point, once you've spoken to Monique and you've decided that, yes, you do want to migrate to New Zealand, and you commit 300 New Zealand dollars, what would that be in euros?
160.
160 euros. Then Zinni's team will create a full immigration report, which will give you the pathway on how you can migrate, whether you use us or not. It's an independently created pathway that is basically your map. And for us as a business, this is the right thing to do. We're not going to tie you up in knots or send you in the wrong direction or talk in, overly litigious language. We're just going to say, this is how you do it. This is the way to go. And the reason being is it's going to save you time, and it's going to save you money, and it's going to give you clarity, and it's going to stop you from spending all this time on the internet trying to find out what to do. And Paul, Paul, I'm just going to hand you over to you yet, because I know that you've saved so many people thousands of hours by just going straight to this point, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those of you who do that initial free assessment where we can sort of clarify that you meet the criteria and then go on and do the full paid assessment that then leads to a consultation, usually with myself. I've done thousands of these consultations over the years, and it's one of the most enjoyable parts of the job, because I talk to people who, even if they've done research, they've still got lots of questions. They still need lots of answers. Immigration policy is changing left, right, and center. There's so many questions. You've only got to look at this chat room now. It's full of questions. And the reality is doesn't matter whether you're a doctor, a nurse, an engineer, a plumber, the process is the same, okay? And you have to go through 4 steps to make a move. Get ready, get a job, get a visa, get on a plane. Now, whilst that sounds really simple, it's not, because each one of those steps has its own barriers and hurdles that need removing. And what we do in that full consultation is we listen to you. We've got the report, and what I do is I use the report from the visa team as a blueprint to outline your roadmap to New Zealand. So when you do that free assessment, we'll get you the basic information. Then you'll get the paid assessment, which gives you the report. Once I've got that report in front of me, I can literally outline your individual roadmap to New Zealand. You're not going to get that using the internet. The internet is just going to send you round and round in circles. It's not about you and your move. It's just pages of information. Not only will you get the report and the way forward, you're going to get all the answers to your questions. Because prior to the call, you can make a list of every question that you need answering, and I'll answer them. That's almost guaranteed. If I don't know the answer, I'll get the answer for you. But there's not many questions we don't know the answers to, because we've been doing this for a long time. And the only way that you can move forward and make a successful move is by getting all the answers to all your questions and getting your own personalized roadmap to New Zealand. Then you're in the perfect position to decide what you want to do. Do you move forward? Don't you move forward? How do you move forward? You can't move forward until you've got a clear roadmap. And that's why we do what we do. And it is so important. The amount of people who tell us that there's no way they would be in New Zealand right now if they hadn't done the initial assessments with us.
Fantastic. And look, it's so true. It just cuts out time, doesn't it? And that's, we're all a bit time short in this crazy world. Monique, just, obviously you've been talking to a lot of people from the Netherlands over the last few months. What are the main concerns that come up? And is there anything that we can sort of discuss right now before we sort of start winding up?
One of the main things is really that they just don't know where to start. And Paul has already said that once. They don't know that starting is the hardest part. And I always tell them, once you put your stake in the ground, momentum is going to take over and everything will just fall into place. Also, the Dutch education system is slightly different to the New Zealand or the UK-based system. I understand that system. So sometimes they think, oh, but I don't have a degree. But actually, when we do the research, when we run it past what we call the NZQA, their education is equivalent to a degree quite often. But other than that, what I can say is about the Dutch, there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. And I know the Dutch like these Dutch and New Zealand Facebook groups. And I belong to one of those Facebook groups, and I see so much misinformation being said on those groups. I just be quiet because it's not my job to say anything. But they're great for networking. Just please be careful for a lot of misinformation and old information that gets given. You'll get 25 different answers.
I think the key point about old information, it couldn't be more relevant now with
exactly.
We are literally getting daily changes, weekly changes from immigration as they upgrade and update the policy. A big part of what Zinni and her team do is we actually brief employers. So we run webinars like this to employers, and we'll have 200, 300 employers on our webinars listening to the updates on immigration policies. So And that's where we've got connections with employers. These people come to us, these employers come to us in order to gain information. And it's one of the benefits of being a kind of a consumer facing, I guess you might say, immigration consultancy. But, our clients are actually the employers, and that's why we're able to assist you by introducing you to those employers. So really simply, how do you make the move? Well, number one is you find out if you're eligible. I mean, that's just that has to be the starting point. You can't really start if you don't know whether you can migrate or not. And incidentally, if we don't think that you can migrate, we'll tell you that. And there may be reasons, whether it's age or whether it's your qualifications or whatever that might be, but you may have the opportunity to fix that. And a lot of people do. It might be, oh gosh, I need an extra qualification. And so they'll spend 2 years getting a qualification and then they actually meet criteria. Once you know that you're eligible, we'll take the full assessment. Cindy's explained that's really, really deep and make sure that everything that you've said stacks up. And then we'll be able to create you that pathway. And then you can work with us. We're more than happy to help you. Well, once these amazing people come on board, we've got an employment portal. So Paul has talked about that. Can we just bring that up on screen? Yeah. So we've got a login basically. So as soon as you become a client, there's a online portal that you will get your own dedicated username and password to. Down the left-hand side there, it tells you all the information on how you can apply for a job independently. We will meet with you anyway and see if we can introduce you to any of our employment partners. And then that same portal will give you all the information that you need to apply for your visa through us. And then secondly, it will guide you through to all our partners. So Paul, a lot of these people that we're bringing up on screen now, you've known for almost 20 years, but do you just want to talk about that relocation support? Because a lot of these are UK based, but they're also able to help Dutch, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Relocation assistance is really important. This isn't just about visas and jobs. We're taking you from where you are and getting you to where you want to be, which is ultimately settled in New Zealand. So flights, shipping, money transfer companies, pet shipping companies, pension transfer companies. There's so many partners that we work with, and we're growing that group of partners all the time. And I've just come back from doing some seminars here in the UK, and we had a whole bunch of our partners there with us in the room. They're very active. And this is all part of preparing for the move. You might not be thinking about flights yet because you're so preoccupied with getting a job offer or your pension or something like that. But actually having all that stuff in place right at the start puts you in a much better position and takes the pressure off. There's nothing worse than getting a job offer when you're not ready. Because if you're not ready and that job offer comes, the pressure is often too much. You might take too long. The employer might get fed up with what you're doing or think that you don't know what you're doing. It's really important to do these things in the right orders, and having partners help you, having a whole team of experts that you can tap into just takes so much pressure off and saves you a lot of time and money.
And what I will say is that we have known these people for 20 years, and they do deliver, and we only work with the people who really can add value. And I like the fact that when you talk to one of our partners, whether it's a pet removal company or a foreign exchange company, that they're experts in this field as well, and they've talked to hundreds if not thousands of people, and so they've got extra tips and advice, but also you can trust them. And I think trust is a really, really, really important factor in the whole process of moving. It's imperative. So look, I think we're already over time. I would have loved to have extended this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask team to put up some photos of life in New Zealand. And whilst those photos are running, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists just to summarize and give their last thoughts. So Paul, if you can give us your last thoughts, and I'm going to start bringing up some photos. Just 1 minute each, please.
Yeah, I guess my last thought goes back to me and my move. I wasn't sure. You'll never be 100% sure about moving to another country. You've got to be 100% committed. And if you're 100% committed and you've got help and support and guidance around you to minimize the risks, maximize the opportunities, then you have got a golden opportunity to live and work in a country that is truly amazing. I feel privileged to be able to call New Zealand my home, even though I'm not there right now. Like millions of Kiwis around the world, I'm not in New Zealand right now, but I can be, and I will be, and I am so lucky to do it. And a lot of you on this webinar have got that opportunity. So my advice is grab it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm going to go to Zinni first. And what I'll just say about these photos, all these photos are actually, they're not photo stock. They're all from working and employees. And we just said, can you share us your holiday snaps and your weekend photos so that we can show people what life in New Zealand is like? So these are just real photos. Okay, Zinni, if you can just sum up, please.
Yeah. I think many of you on this webinar, your goal is to migrate to New Zealand to obtain residency in New Zealand. So everyone's path might be different, especially with the changing scene of not just a work visa scheme, but also the residency options, the new residence opening, the skilled migrant category opening. So, we're really here to walk this path with you, to guide you through that whole process, not just of you getting here into New Zealand as that first step, but also you staying on, how you gain residence, how do you gain permanent residence, and so on and so forth. So really a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. It's what we always say. So take that first step, and we will, like I say, walk this whole journey with you.
Thank you so much, Zinni. And coming back to these photos, as you can see, family is an amazingly big reason for people to move. A lot of people we talk to, when we ask them, why do you want to migrate? They say, well, I want to for my family, better lifestyle for my family, and, more time, less commuting. And as you can see, just by these photos, it is very much a place whereby you can spend a lot of time outdoors with your kids, with your family. And that's probably one of the most amazing things about it. So finally, though, our special guest for today, Monique, if you can finish off, and I don't mind if you don't speak English, Monique, you can to your fellow Dutch.
Well, my Dutch is a bit rusty, but er zijn verschillende redenen om naar Nieuw-Zeeland te emigreren. Het is een geweldig mooi land. Je hebt heel veel ruimte en rust. De mensen zijn vriendelijk. En emigreren naar Nieuw-Zeeland is niet moeilijk. Maar je moet weten om waar te beginnen. En met onze hulp wordt dat allemaal wel duidelijk. Dus vergeet niet om de free appraisal form in te vullen. Ik hoop dat jullie allemaal iets hebben geleerd vanavond. Wat rusten allemaal. En hopelijk tot gauw in Nieuw-Zeeland.
So that's you, that's us. Kia ora, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate that so many of you, literally hundreds of people, have joined this webinar. We really hope to see you in New Zealand. And please fill out that free eligibility assessment. And then we can sort of open you to all the opportunities that we can create. So good evening to you, and we hope to see you again. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.